on this important conversation. So as you see, you'll get a little notification that we are recording. This is just because this is an important conversation for our community. And not everyone's able to attend in person today. So if you are not comfortable being recorded, you can just turn off your camera. You can type your responses into the chat. If you do want to share, just know that it will be recorded. But this is an important part about speaking up about who we are and living faithfully. And, you know, I'm actually thinking about a piece of scripture from Paul's letter to Ephesians 4:15. He says, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. And that's what this is all about today, about speaking up in love. So I hope you will all be willing to engage in this conversation, and an important one. And this is part of a series, Lunch and Learn series, the first one of our fall. If you're interested in more, we'll be signing up more. But if you want to support what we do and what Hillhurst does in general, you can always go to our website and give an offering through giving. We offer these things free because this is important. This is what we do. We don't want money to be a barrier. So if you're able, you're always welcome to support our ministries. So that being said, as John so beautifully put, this is really rooted in our values of Hillhurst to ask this question: is it enough to be not racist? But what does it mean to be anti-racist? And what does it mean to be an anti-racist community? Well, I'm so thrilled to have Dieulita Daitus guide us through this conversation. Dieulita, I first met at when Hillhurst hosted the Affirming United conference, and she bravely stood up and challenged us about how we represented diversity in a panel discussion. And I'm like, oh goodness, here's somebody that I'm going to know for a while. And since she has become a member of our Affirming Advisory Committee and a member of our worship planning, she's also the co-founder of Ubuntu, which is an organization that works towards justice around diversity and equity and inclusion throughout Alberta. And I am so thrilled to introduce you all to Dieulita. So I will pass it over. Where did you go? You've vanished from my screen.
I think I'm here.
Oh, there you are. I'm
Yeah.
going to go on speaker view, then I'll see you.
All right. I don't know how to say thank you for spending your lunchtime with me, your lunch hour with me, but I'm so glad to see the different faces. I love Hillhurst. And so I will always say yes to sharing and spending time with you. But before we start, or before we continue, we must do something, and not just do it because it's to repeat it or because it's a script, but because we must acknowledge the land. And we acknowledge the land because it's important, it's tradition, it's history, and it is a part of us being anti-racist. And so Keith, I think there you go. Yeah. And so and this land acknowledgement is from Ubuntu, but John and Keith do very well every time we're speaking to talk about the land where Hillhurst finds itself. And so I will do this land acknowledgement as I am on Treaty 6 right now, but we work on Treaty 6 and Treaty 7. And then I'm going to invite Keith to come on again and sort of do a brief land acknowledgement. Just because we don't want to do it because it's something that must be done, but we want to do it because we would like to acknowledge this and to participate in this. And so as an organization that's created by two women of color, we are not Indigenous to this land, myself, Sadia. We pause to acknowledge and offer recognition to the original inhabitants of these lands, waters, and spaces on which we find ourselves. As we work, live, and raise families, we understand that we must consider the complexities of settler impacts on Indigenous histories, languages, economies, livelihood, culture, customs, well-being, spirituality, and governance with thoughtful care. We also recognize that we have so much more work to do than simply reciting a script. In acknowledging that we are on these territories, we recognize that we are all treaty people. and that we must uphold the treaty rights in every moment of our everyday lives. We must commit to living right with everyone on this land, doing our part to respect the environment and respect the prosperity of the original caretakers of both Treaties 6 and Treaty 7, for again, we are all treaty people. And Keith, if you don't mind, if you would like
Yes, of
to,
course.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Hillhurst United Church, we are treaty people as well, member of Treaty 7, situated at the confluence of the Elbow and Bow Rivers in what is called by the Blackfoot Mohkinstsis. This is Treaty 7 is signed originally by the Yahe Nakota, the Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is the Niitsitapi people. And as some of you may know, this is also a region of Alberta that's home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And I invite you all, if you haven't as yet, to share where you're joining us from in the chat. I'll pass it back to you, Dieulita.
Yeah, thank you. And the reason why we do this is because, you knock when you're entering someone's home, right? You knock and they greet you and there's permission that's given. And so this is almost like that, right? Like you're almost asking for permission. You're, or I should say, we are asking for permission, and we are bringing awareness and knowledge and all of that good stuff that this is, I am here on Treaty 6 territory, right? And part of land acknowledgement is understanding the laws, the governance, and the people of Treaty 6. So it's not just enough to simply say, I live on Treaty 6 territory or Treaty 3 territory or Treaty 7, but to understand what as a person living on those lands, what are you supposed to be upholding? So make sure that you read the treaties so that you can make sure that you are upholding the treaties, and because we are, again, all treaty people. Next slide, please, Keith. And I just want to say all of the spelling errors are not my fault, but they're the fault of Sadia. I'm going to blame her because she's not here today. And so if there's any spelling errors, grammatical errors, we can just blame those on her. And everything that looks good, that looks amazing, that you like, we can just say that, Dieulita did it. That's what we're going to go with today. And so today is just an easy lunch and learn chat. It's a conversation. And so I don't want you to feel as if this is going to be a lecture, or we're going to be telling you how to be anti-racist, or that there's a guidebook in how to do this work, because none of us know how to do the work perfectly. But through conversation, what we'll be doing is learning from each other. We'll be sharing with each other, so that we can be better citizens and better residents. And so today with our Lunch and Learn, what we'll be looking at is a bit about Ubuntu, what we do and our work, but we'll also be focusing about Hillhurst. What does Hillhurst do? And about the future, because we all make up Hillhurst, and the future will be shaped by us. So that's where the conversation will come in, so that we can remember who we are and where we're going. And if you can go to the next slide, please, Keith. So that's us. That's Sadia in the yellow, and I am Dieulita. We are two women of color. She is Muslim, I am Christian, and we work together. And it's always interesting because we're always sending each other holiday greetings and trying to remember what the other person is celebrating on this day. And, just trying to be good folks to each other. We're more like sisters now. And our organization is called Ubuntu Mobilizing Central Alberta. Our focus is in Central Alberta, with equity, justice, compassion, conversation, hard as they may be, but we like having those conversations with people and meeting people and just, representing our different communities as much as we can. So that's just a tad bit about us. We have fun in our conversations. Again, we don't lecture. We don't like being lectured to. We don't like lecturing people. It's all about good fun and good conversations and moving forward. And speaking about fun, we can't have a lunch and learn without singing, without some dancing, without some clapping. So there's a song here that's by a South African, the Soweto African choir, which is in the next slide, Keith. So what we're going to do, I think you're muted. I can't sing, but we're going to sing somehow. I'm just going to mute my mic though, and I'm going to invite you, if you would like, if you're able to just sing along with this choir. It's a beautiful song, and there's so much spirit and soul into it. So I'm going to mute my mic, but if you feel as if you can sing, go right ahead. If you would like to dance, do that as well. If you would like to clap, however you would like to participate in this song, we can do that together, because we're not able to break bread together, but we can sing and still dance virtually. So as the video play, feel free to participate.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Oh, glory of heaven, you must be sure you need him now. Oh, sure you need him now. You must be sure you need him now. Oh, glory of heaven, you must be sure you need him now. We need him every day and every hour. Oh, glory of heaven, need the Lord before. You must be sure you need him now. Oh, sure you need him now. You must be sure you need him now. Oh, glory of heaven, need the Lord before. You must be sure you need him now. We need him every day and every hour.
We need him in the morning. We need him in the day. We need him in the evening. Oh yeah, and when my heart's still hurts, we need him in the morning. We need him in the day. We need him in the evening. Oh yeah, and when my heart's oh glory, if you ever knew the Lord before, sure you do need him now. Sure you do need him now. Oh glory, if you never knew the Lord, oh yeah, we need him every day and every hour. Oh glory, if you ever needed the Lord before, yes you could need him now. Oh you do need him now. Oh glory, if you ever needed him, you need him now. We need him every day and every hour.
Awesome.
Okay, how was that? How was that?
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's an amazing song, and thank you for participating. And whenever I hear those songs, it just it makes you feel so joyful, and then I think I can sing. So sometimes I'm tempted to unmute my mic, and then I realize, no, I cannot sing. But it was so good to hear some of the voices that were coming through. Some people were clapping, and it's just such an amazing way to worship. Which brings us to our conversation today. Okay, I'm not racist, so why am I here? So why are you here? If you're able and if you're willing to put in the chat, why are you here? Did John and Anne bribe you with lunch? Did someone tell you that they'll give you coffee? But why are you here? Why did you think that it was important to be here today? So if you're willing, you can put it in the chat, or you can unmute your mic, I believe, and just let us know. So we'll just take 2 minutes.
Don't everybody talk at once.
Let us know why you're here. Be as honest, as open as you would like to be, as you feel that you can be. Okay. Moving towards anti-racism. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else would like to share?
I will share.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Carolyn.
Hi, Carolyn.
I guess I'm here because I learned a lot from 2020. One was that the world is much more racist than I thought.
Yeah.
I was sort of naive about that. And yeah, and I've just been really disappointed and saddened by how incredibly racist so many Christians are. And it really bothers me so much. And it's really opened my eyes. So I guess, yeah, I want to be anti-racist. I don't want to, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So thank you to everyone that is sharing in the chat. And I'm so glad that everyone is here. Yeah, I'm hoping for after the fact bribes as well. That's always a good thing. You know, when friends say, hey, come to this thing and I'll buy you coffee, that's always something good. And as well, learning, unlearning, and relearning is very important. But this is a hard conversation to start. And so when Hillhurst decided to do this, Hillhurst recognized that, hey, we don't just want to do these things as things are happening, but we want to continue to do them throughout the year. But to get to where we want to be, we first have to have that conversation about why, and as well as how. So how can we be an anti-racist church? How can we ensure that our members are trying to be as anti-racist, anti-oppressive as much as possible? What does that look like? But do we even need to have the conversation? And while you may be thinking, oh yeah, this is so hard for us and all of this, I'm going to share a personal story. I didn't think that I was an ableist person. I thought I have family members who have special needs, some have different disabilities, some are neurodivergent, and I'm nice to them. I'm kind to them. I go out of my way to help them as much as possible. I'm not an ableist. So whenever I heard talks about people who are ableist or people who were not supporting people from the disability community and all that was not me at all. I mean, how can it be me? I'm a good person. I go to church sometimes, you know, and I'm nice to people. But then I read a book called The Pretty One by Kia Brown. And I remembered as I was reading it, she is a queer Black woman who is in a wheelchair. And I remembered as I was reading it, she was talking to me, not to anybody else in the book. She was talking directly to me. And at first there was the embarrassment that, oh my God, she's talking to me, right? Then there was the shame that came with that. There was the guilt, there was the defensiveness. How is she talking to me? I'm a good Christian, I'm a good person, I try my best. But when I read the book the second time, it showed me exactly where I was going wrong and where I continue to go wrong some days, right? Because we live in a world where we're not always immersed in other cultures and other languages and other religions. And so we think because we're nice and we're kind and we're not punching people in the face, we're not out there burning crosses, we don't have on the hoods and burning crosses and being a part of the KKK, that we're good folks. And while that is true, we still continue to be part of a deeper system. We still continue to be part of bigger institutions that are racist because they are built on racism. And those are hard things to accept. Because I had to accept when Kia talked, she talked about the Christian church and how we view people with disabilities. We want to cure them. We can't imagine heaven with disabilities. And so what we do is we try as much as possible to erase them. We want to erase their disabilities. We want to erase the special needs that they have. We want to fix how they think, right? We pray for these people. And one of the biggest things that stood out to me in the book was when she talked about Stephen Hawking. When he passed away, the world was mourning for this man, this genius, this brilliant person. But we can only imagine him being free and living life without his wheelchair. And so there were a lot of art that was created in his honor. And most of these art pieces had him without his wheelchair. So suddenly he was standing up and he wasn't the Stephen Hawking that we knew. Because in our mind, heaven cannot be a place where disability exists. Because if disability exists, then something is wrong. And she said that also influences how we think in our everyday lives towards people with disabilities. We want to erase things. We want to make them better. We want to change them. We want them to look like us. And the Christian church has done that. The institution that we know of as Christianity has done that. But I want you, before we dive in even deeper into this big conversation, I want you to, what we're going to do, because there's not enough time for everyone to introduce themselves, but we're going to introduce ourselves to each other through a story. So we're going to do a waterfall story. Imagine that you are a light source. So you can choose to be the sun, the moon, a light bulb, a headlight, stars. What else gives light? A flashlight. Imagine that you are a light source. What light source would you be and why? How would you help Hillhurst? Thanks so much, Carolyn. It's recorded, so you'll be able to see it after. So if you are a light source, which light source would you be and why in Hillhurst? And so we're going to start a story. And of course, every good story starts with once upon a time. And I want you to put in the chat to begin your story with there was a, and whatever light source that you would like to be in Hillhurst, and how you can use your source of lightness to help Hillhurst. So, and we're going to do it all together. So you can begin writing your story, but don't press enter quite yet. We're going to take 2 minutes so that it becomes a waterfall. So once upon a time, there was a church called Hillhurst United that was in Calgary, and it had many different light sources. And so now you can finish writing out your story. And then when I say go, you can enter it so that we can see which kind of light sources we'll have at Hillhurst. So I just put a timer on for 1 minute, get all of your stories together, think about which kind of light source you will be and why, and how you can help Hillhurst, how you can help Calgary, Alberta, Canada, the world. Very brief so that we can actually read everyone's stories. And then when I say go, you can press enter. Does that make sense? Does it not make sense to anyone? Okay, I'm going to go with yes. Okay, so
we're giving the light source and then the why that light
yes.
source. Okay.
Yes. So whatever light source you choose to be and why. And of course, your how are you going to help Hillhurst? Because
And how is that light gonna?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. How you as the light is going to help Hillhurst.
Okay.
So 20 more seconds. 20, 19. Okay, and go. Now you can press enter. Oh, look at this. Okay. And now we're just going to take a moment. I'll try and go back. I don't know if to go back up and see what we have very quickly. I think I went up too much.
I got it. Do you want me to read back a few?
Yes, please. So once
Okay.
upon a time, go ahead, Keith.
So once upon a time, there was a church called Hillhurst, and inside it, there were many different light sources. There was a light box that showed details for careful examination. Some details were good, some were bad, but all were more visible. Light helps by clarifying what is there. There was a full moon bringing light in the midst of darkness, a twinkling star. There was a small candle burning. It could go into small dark corners and bring light. A twinkling star that shined with questions, a listening ear, ideas, and creativity. There's also a lantern, because a lantern is able to provide light in the high wind. And there was also an eternal flame burning. There was also a light bulb that invited others to these events. A star, because it shone when the world was in darkness from far away. A candle, because it flickers to keep your attention. A spotlight, lighting up individual situations which need to be brought forward and reviewed. A light source that was the moon, that's always changing, evolving, every day is slightly different. A star, because it acts as a beacon of light and a source of direction for someone who might be lost. Stars collectively can light a whole space. Or a nightlight, why helpful but not overpowering, or a sparkler, unpredictable light. Or maybe there was a glowing fungus when all the other lights go out that can illuminate hidden things which we didn't know were a part of the world.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, beautiful reading voice, Keith. So when you think about the different light sources, I want you to think of your spot in Hillhurst, in Alberta, and in the world. And in this conversation, we all have stories to share. We all have experiences to share. We all have questions to ask. But sometimes we overpower other light sources, right? So sometimes I'm going to ask you when other people are speaking, not to turn off your light, but to dim just a little bit so that you can take in their light source so that, they may shine. We'll put the spotlight on them. And then when you have a question or an idea, or if you want to share something, feel free to be your big, beautiful, bright self, or, to be the little candle or star, or whatever you may choose to be. But just understand where you are right now. And also understand that as light sources, we all have a different way of showing light, right? But in thinking about light, we need to also think about darkness. And with darkness, we sometimes, oftentimes think about things that's frightening, that's moody, that's more evil. Sometimes we think of dark as a place where, you have to be hidden, or things that are hidden. And then we sometimes compare darkness to blackness, right? And then all of those negative connotations that go with that. So that opens up another conversation, and we now get to go into another part of the conversation. So you're still holding your light, but you're going to dim it a little when other people are speaking, when other people are sharing their viewpoints, asking questions. And when you are sharing and asking questions and sharing your opinions and and stories that you could be your big, beautiful, bright self. So that's one way for us to hold this conversation, because it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be hard, but we're not going to tell you you're a bad or evil person. That's not why we're here. No one's going to try to dim your lights, but what we're going to try to do is to share with each other. So sometimes we're going to put the spotlight on other people, other things, and what we're working on. So just keep that in mind as we go through this conversation that's so needed. And thank you. I cannot state enough how honored I am that you chose to share with me your light source. Next slide, please, Keith. So how can we be racist? How can our church be racist? Because before we can become anti-racist, we need to know what it means to be racist, and we need to know what it takes to be anti-racist, and all of those things, right? So here's a question that I want you to think about, not necessarily answer, but think about. What is racism? So now is the time where you're going to dim yourself just a tad bit to think about what you've always known racism to be, and what you're expecting to hear about racism, and what racism is. So just now take a second, a half a second to dim and to think about what is racism. Who is racist? What does racism mean? You don't have to answer. This is a rhetorical one. Because it's a hard one. There's so many different ways that people have defined racism, and it moves and it changes every so often. Okay, so as of right now, we're going to say that racism is the marginalization and or oppression of people of color based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people. Racism is built on systems and institutions and is upheld by people in everyday life functions. And what I'll do is I'll put that definition in the chat box. So if you're thinking, what is racism? A lot of times we think colonialism, we think the difficult, we think discrimination, we think segregation, we think Martin Luther King Jr., we think all of these things, but it's really the marginalization, and it's pushing people away. It's oppressing people, people of color, based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy. So this is like a ladder that was created, and it privileges certain people. Something to note is that who is white changes at times, because before it was more based on wealth, it was based on access, it was based on, if you think about the British Empire, right? If you are Irish, you were not always treated as equally as the British or Scottish, right? And all of those people, people from Spain were sometimes not seen as being white, whereas today when we think, we're like, oh yeah, they fit in there. So it changes. And the reason why it changes is because the hierarchy changes, and privilege changes. And racism is built on systems and institutions. So it's not just you acting on a day-to-day basis, but it's you acting on a day-to-day basis that supports these systems, that continues to allow racism to thrive. And that may look like language, education, healthcare, the church, community functions, nonprofit organizations, the media. It's our everyday life and how we think and marginalize people and how we oppress them as well. So it's important to know that structural and institutional racism is deeply ingrained in our society, as I was saying before, and even the church. Now, as Christians, we'll be like, not my church, not this church, because we have the love of Christ and we speak the good news and we talk about the gospel. But it's important to know how what we now see as Christianity was brought to other people. And one of the things that I want, if you don't remember anything, is to remember this. There's the idea that Christianity, as we now know it, was brought to Africans or to the continent of Africa. And I want to challenge that thought, because we do know that Christianity, by the message from Christ, the gospel existed before it was brought back to the continent. And when we're thinking of Christianity that was brought back to Africa, it was not the same Christianity or the same gospel message that came out of Africa. And that's going to be a little bit of a homework in just a bit. So how is this even a thing? From centuries, Christianity as we know it now continues to enjoy a privilege of economic, social, and political power, especially over non-European or non-white Christian people across the world through imperialism and colonialism. We have changed the narrations about Christian history and the ills that have been committed in the name of God, country, and church. In 1492, Christopher Columbus trespassed on islands in the Caribbean. When he arrived on the islands, now Haiti, Haiti was home to millions of indigenous people. And that's something that a lot of people don't think. Like when we think indigenous people, we think Canada, we think Australia, we think the US. But the Caribbean was home to millions and millions of different indigenous people as well. And within 20 years, the population of indigenous people went from the millions to 32,000, about 32,000 after the arrival of Christopher Columbus. So in just 20 years, most of the people were tortured, they were raped, they were worked to death, they were killed, they were enslaved. And with that, in 1492, so with the people being killed off, Africans were now brought enslaved and transported from the African continent to the Caribbean. And that stretched from Brazil all the way down south, all the way to Bahamas, which is one of the most northerly islands in the Caribbean. And so they were brought to replace. When these people were brought, were kidnapped and brought over, their language were taken, their names were taken away from them, their history was erased, and they were forced to accept Christianity. Not accepting Christianity meant that you would be killed. It meant that you would be tortured until you accepted Christianity. And so what we found in a lot of the countries in the Caribbean was that they practiced what is called above the table and under the table, where they were still holding on to their indigenous ways of life, to their spirituality. They were still holding on to their religion. And we now know that many of these people were Christians, but they just did not, they were not practicing the European way of Christianity. So what does this have to do with us today? A lot of information, but what does this have to do with Hillhurst? What does this have to do with you? What does this have to do with me? And what it has to do with us is that racism still exists in the church, because theology argues that some people are better than others. Theology also argues that some people are blessed more than others because of what they have. Some theology argues that heavenly beings look a certain way. And when heavenly beings look a certain way, what we tend to do is we then translate that to people who are here. And so in order to go to heaven, in order to be in heavenly places, in order to be an angel, you have to look a certain way. And so our theology teaches this, Christian art teaches this, Christian history teaches this. And so it's sort of like embedded into us as Christians, as people, as a group of people, as an institution. The way we talk about prayers, the way we talk about discipleship, the way we talk about gospel, the way we talk about love, the way we talk about God, it's all seen through the lens of racism, because that's sort of what has given the power to one set of people to say, hey, you need to accept this, right? The hymns that we sing in church are oftentimes very European, and they were hymns, and they were songs, and they were prayers that were curated during a time when racism was prevalent, when slavery was prevalent. And we even see that in talking about racism, we're not just talking about anti-Blackness, but it's also looking at anti-Asian racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and all of those things, because it's embedded in us as a system. We don't see We don't see others in heaven because Christianity has taken heaven and made it into a white supremacist place. And so if you look at pictures of angels, if you look at pictures of God, if you look at pictures of Jesus, if you look at pictures of the disciples, they all have very European features. And so far, the church hasn't been able to let go of that because it's so much a part of us that even when I see a brown Jesus or an Asian Jesus or Jesus who even looks like me, it takes me a while to accept that because for the most part, for most of my life, I saw someone who did not look like me. When we're preaching, we tend to focus on Christian philosophers, European Christian philosophers, right? And their way of life and their way of doing things. So those are some of the hard things that we've had to come into contact with, the hard things for us to think about, the hard things for us to question. Hard, difficult conversations to have. However, being a part of an organization like Hillhurst, the ray of sunshine there is that we're trying. We're trying together. We have chosen to move together as a group of people who are saying, hey, yes, we understand that we are part of the system. Yes, we understand that we may unintentionally be upholding these systems, but we can work together every day, every Sunday to make changes in that system. We can work together to fight against that system. We can work together to become anti-racist. And to be anti-racist means that you're not simply being an ally. You're not simply standing by and watching things happen. You're not simply donating funds to organizations. You're not simply doing the good work, but you are choosing to be an active part, to play an active role in dismantling racism, in dismantling systems that have been built on racism. What does that look like? Well, it looks like having people like John Pentland and people like Keith and people like Anne and other members of the church saying, hey, we need to do something and have conversation. It looks like members of Hillhurst participating in Orange Shirt Day. It looks like members of Hillhurst participating in the days for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It looks like the people in Hillhurst participating in Black Lives Matter movements and calling for equity, calling for justice, calling for compassion. But it also looked like Hillhurst not participating in sending missionaries to countries that where we believe that these people needs to be saved. It also looks like changing the way we think about theology. So that may be having a conversation with Reverend John and saying, hey, you preached about this. Have you thought about this from the perspective of someone else, from Hagar, or from the perspective of someone who isn't always represented in the Bible? What about when we talk about people who are not the main characters? Can we tell stories about the African church that's still very vibrant? Can we tell stories about the Indian Orthodox Church? Can we tell stories about the Ethiopian Orthodox Church? Can we quote more African leaders? Can we quote more Southeast Asian Christian leaders? Can we have them be presenters and panelists? Can we have them represented in our church? That's what being an anti-racist church is starting to look like. It means having the difficult conversations. It means being part of difficult conversations. It means being part of difficult movements. And sometimes it may mean that you are not seen as being Christian because you have chosen the right way to have these conversations and to do this work. And if we think back about the LGBTQ community, right? Where they were like, hey, we're Christians, we want to be a part of this. We want to enjoy the fullness of grace and mercy and love. And people are like, no, you don't. So it's choosing to break down those systems, choosing to break down those ideas, those theologies, because there were biblical texts that were used against the community. So it's challenging every single day the ideologies and the theologies that some people are better than other people, and that we continue to oppress and marginalize some folks over others. But it also looks like privilege. And sometimes it looks like giving up your privilege. One of the conversations that, and I'm going just a little fast because time is catching up to us, but if you think about Black History Month, if you think about Indigenous, World Indigenous Day and World Indigenous Month and Hispanic Heritage Month, all of those people, they're given one day out of the month, or they're giving 1 month. What happens the rest of the year? Where are the conversations taking place? What are the conversations taking place about? Why do I have one day and then there are the other days that just happens with everything else? But if we're able to include anti-racism work in everything that we do, in every sermon, in every song, if we can participate in songs that are foreign to us, that we may not know how to sing the songs properly, that we may not know how to word things properly, that's what anti-racism looks like. And this conversation, though fast, though brief, though small, we decided to do this because we wanted to start the conversation. This isn't the entire conversation. There are going to be so many more opportunities for you to ask questions, to learn from Indigenous leaders, for you to learn from Asian leaders, for you to learn from leaders from the Caribbean and speakers, and hear stories and experiences and hear the different songs. So this was just the tip of the iceberg. It was just to start the conversation. It was also just to say, hey, Hillhurst is prepared to have these difficult, hard conversation, and we will continue them throughout the rest of the year. Like I said in the beginning, this was not a lecture. This is not to tell you how bad you are. This is not to tell you how good you can be, but this was simply to say, this is why we want to be an anti-racist church. We would like to invite you to be an anti-racist church with us as we move forward. I hope that the light source that you had in the beginning of this talk, that you hold it, that you keep it, that you share it with others, and that when conversations around racism and other hard topics come up, that you're able to dim your light just a little bit, just so that you can listen and hear and understand people just a tad bit better. And then when you have to be an ambassador for Hillhurst, when you have to speak out on behalf of other people, that you do allow yourself to be your full, bright, and true selves. And so with just a couple more minutes, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but please do know that this will not be the end of the conversation that we're starting. And I think Keith has something to say about what else is coming up in the anti-racism conversation as well. So I do know that was a lot. I do know that it was fast, but just remember that this was the start of the conversation and that it will continue for more time to come because this work is ongoing.
Thank you, Dieulita. This has been wonderful. So please share your questions in the chat. We'll have time to answer a few. But as we said, this is just the beginning, and this is exciting because we wanted to gather with all of you, with Hillhurst, to create a cohort, to create a team of people who are interested in engaging this conversation. Why should Hillhurst be anti-racist? Because starting October 12th, for 40 days, the United Church of Canada is inviting us to participate in 40 days of engagement with anti-racism. So we wanted to have this conversation first with you all, so we can step into that 40 days together as a cohort and engage and see what we can learn from that and how we can take our engagement with those 40 days and transform our community to not just be a more hospitable community to diverse people, but to, as Dieulita has brought us to actively lean into our values of justice and transform the world, leave it better off than we have found it. So Sarah's put in the chat here, there's the link to signing up. So please do go sign up so you'll get notification of all the events, all the ways to engage, and continue to check hillhurstunited.life, where we will have more information about how we as a community will continue to engage in these 40 days. And I love this, use your light source. Thanks for this invaluable metaphor that speaks to the diversity of everyone here. And thank you all for being a part of this conversation. It is inspiring to think that, 30 of us will take time out of our day to participate in this really important conversation. So I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so grateful to Dieulita for being a part of our community, for leading us in this conversation. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And I hope that I didn't sound like a lecturer, that it was more of a conversation of why we're starting it. I hope that there wasn't a ton of definitions and quotes and all of that, but
Well,
that
and maybe, we have a few minutes now. So if anyone feels like they want to answer the question, why? Why should we as Hillhurst be anti-racist? Has anyone learned something from today? Maybe just share a few words in the chat of why maybe you've learned, what you're taking away, maybe why you might be inspired, why you think this is a good idea or not. So yeah, feel free to unmute, or if you want to just share any final thoughts. This is great. We're hearing it's good to examine assumptions. Lots of thank you and praise. While some thoughts are coming in here. Oh, are there more lunch and learns? Yes. We are going to continue this participating in the anti-racist work for the 40 days. And we will continue with other lunch and learns on different topics that are relevant to the church. Our next one, we're going to go back to some basics of identity and look at what is identity, what are the different letters in the LGBTQ2SIA alphabet, what do they mean, what are some of the changing definitions all about. So many of are curious, and I know there are new words that I'm getting introduced to all the time. So we're going to have an expert in the field come talk to us about that. We're going to go to the last slide here. This one?
Nope.
Nope. Let me know when I land on it. Just say it loud.
It's the it's like slide 13.
Okay, is this it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to leave us with that so that we're thinking, if you're ever asking yourself, how can I be anti-racist, or how can I be a better Christian, to think whatsoever things are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, good, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, do those things. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And we've got a few more comments here. People are taking away, an awareness that we live in a systemically racist society. And this is a chance to look at our assumptions, that racism was intentional and a part of a system meant to marginalize. And it feels like we are just opening to the LGBTQ work, opening wide to everyone. Everyone is equally important, and we must learn to love everyone equally. Wonderful. And Dieulita here has a comment to read, "These mountains are sacred spaces" by the Reverend John Snow, Tony's father.
Yep.
So excellent. Well, we're at 1. So thank you all. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Please give it up to Dieulita for her time here, and turn to hillhurstunited.life, and don't forget to subscribe to the United Church's 40 Days of Active Engagement with Anti-Racism, and let's keep this conversation going together. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.